right, thank you, Bruce, and thank you all for having me tonight. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to the Fogy season returning and coming back in, so I know I got to meet a few of y'all at the tail end of last year, and I've had to put up with Larson all summer, but for the rest of y'all, it's a pleasure to meet each and every one of you, and looking forward to this season kicking off. So I've got a few slides put together for you. I'm just going to tell you a little bit briefly about where I've been leading up to this point, and tell you a little bit about some of the things that we've done this summer, and then along the way tell you some of the programs and projects that we're looking into for the fall and beyond. So feel free to throw things at me or holler. If you have a question, I'm glad to answer any of those along the way. I have made presentations to kindergartners and politicians, find out they're about the same. So anything y'all want to toss at me, I'm glad to take on as well. So thank y'all for having me. So as Bruce mentioned, we did just come from the mountains. My girls and I have been with the Georgia DNR for about the past 15 years. We have managed 3 state parks in North Georgia. One of them is James Floyd State Park in Summerville. And then they asked me to open Don Carter State Park just above Gainesville, Georgia. It's on Lake Lanier where the Chattahoochee comes in. So we got to develop that 1,300-acre park and put cabins, trails, and work with a historic campground there as well. And then the last 9 years I've been with Smithgall Woods as the park manager and director there, which included Hardman Farm. And I've got a few more slides to talk about those. So. But my girls and I are glad to be here. It's definitely been a culture shock for them. They've been in the mountains their whole life. When they were real little, we would go to other friends' houses. And as a park ranger for the last 15 years, I've lived on the parks that I've managed. So we've had ranger residences there that have responded to search and rescue after hours, if folks get locked out of their cottages after hours or lost on a trail. So we've lived on the park our entire lives until moving down here, but when they were real little, we'd go to somebody's house and they'd say, well, which state park do they live on? So they're getting used to being in a neighborhood and having neighbors, but glad to be down here. And my oldest there on the left, Isla's playing volleyball at Glen Academy, and my youngest, Emmy, is looking forward to the golf team at Glen Middle later this winter. So we're glad to be down here. As mentioned, my most recent experience has been managing these 2 properties, Smithgall Woods State Park and Hardman Farm. They are near the Helen, Georgia area. If y'all are familiar with that area, we don't really claim Helen at those properties. We kind of keep them at arm's length, but we're glad to be a part of that community. But Smithgall Woods State Park, and there's a lot of interesting similarities between these properties and Jekyll Island. Smithgall Woods State Park is about 6,000 acres. It is a conservation area with no development other than these rental cottages here. So just a very unique piece of property, about the same size as Jekyll Island. And on the edge of the Smithgall Woods, at the very end of the Dukes Creek Valley, is the Hardman Farm State Historic Site. And Hardman Farm is a 173-acre historic site with 19 buildings on the National Historic Register. So coming down here to a 6,000-acre island with a 240-acre district, it felt kind of like just changing the mountains for the coast and coming into a new property. So excited for that. Another neat story, real quick, about the correlation between Hardman Farm and Jekyll Island. Hardman Farm was named after Governor Dr. Lamartine Hardman. He was the governor of Georgia in 1927 to 1931. He served 2 terms. They were 2-year terms at the time. And that was also about the same time that the Jekyll Island Club had realized that they had been spelling Jekyll wrong for so long. So once they discovered that Sir Joseph Jekyll actually had 2 L's and wanted to make the change, they sent that off to the Capitol in Atlanta to have that changed over, and it was signed over by Dr. Hardman himself. So kind of neat for me to bring a little bit of my old home to my new home. But just real neat. But Smithgall Woods is a great piece of property. It's the largest conservation area in the state of Georgia. It protects the Dukes Creek watershed. which we protect around it with hiking trails and several waterfalls on the property. It also does an outreach program and covers 27 counties in the Northeast Georgia area for outreach, wildlife education, and that sort of thing. We have field trips on site too. The entire property is funded by 6 rental cottages, and they're not your typical state park cottage. They were built by Mr. Smithgall in the 1980s. Mr. Smithgall was a Georgia Tech graduate who got into the media industry and was very successful with newspapers and radio and dabbled in a little bit of television before retiring. But he has purchased about 5,000 acres around Dukes Creek prior to 1994, when he decided to donate the property in what we call a gift purchase, where he sold it to the state of Georgia at half of its value while Governor Zell Miller was in office. The state's since taken it since 1994 and grown to about 6,000 acres, and the education center that I mentioned and the entire the educational programs, the hunting and fishing offered on the properties, the bird watching, all the conservation that we do with the protection of hemlocks and American chestnuts and other Appalachian species are all done off the taxpayer dollar, thanks to the revenue from the 6 rental cottages. But like I said, they are unique. They're not like other state park cottages. Some of them are 5-bedroom, 5.5 bath, 5,000 square foot, and they straddle trout streams such as this one, the Smithgall Cottage, that Mr. Smithgall had Montana lodgepoles shipped in from out west, and cedar shake roofs, and just very beautiful properties that the public can stay in. But where I really found my way was at Hardman Farm. Hardman Farm is a state historic site that was given to the state by the Hardman family in 1999. The state took about 15 years at about $500,000 a year to renovate the property and open it to the public in 2014. I was fortunate enough to come on in 2015 after all the cleanup had been done, and we just got to open the property. So we did start off in 2015 as just a satellite operation to where I'd be at Smithgall Woods and go check on our educator with 3 part-time tour guides. When I left earlier this year, we had grown to a manager, full-time preservationist, as well as 7 tour guides and a very active friends group. We did a lot of programs there, several festivals on the property. If anybody knows where the Nakuchi Indian Mound is with the gazebo on top, that is part of the property and one of the 19 buildings on the National Historic Register here. So the Hardman Farm property has just been a really interesting and unique piece of property that we had. It was built by Captain Nichols in 1870. He was in the Confederate Army, and he stayed there for about 25 years until his death at the turn of the century, when he sold it to Calvin Honeycutt, who used it as a summer home from Atlanta for about a decade. Calvin Honeycutt was a founding father of Fulton County. And then he sold it to Dr. Hardman right around 1910, and Dr. Hardman was looking in the area. He was from Clarksville. He was looking for multiple farms where he could have his dairy operations. So he opened the dairy production there, the Nakuchi Dairy Production, because this area had some very good springs on it that ran through the property and allowed them to cool the milk as well as water the cows inside of a state-of-the-art 190-foot barn where water would run through the floor of the barn, and he had a monorail system where the silos would fill the grain and the monorail system would go around and feed the cows. So very innovative at the time. He had about 50 head of New Jersey cows in there. So it's been a neat operation. We opened it as basically a bookstore and hourly tours of the mansion for about 3 days of the week. Hardman Farm is now open every day of the year, except for in the months of January and February when it gets very cold in the mountains. And it's now open every day of the year, and like I said, has multiple festivals, after-hours dinners, and different things. We actually do, and I've got another slide here about Hardman Farm. We actually do grow our own sorghum on the property, and we will take that sorghum and mill it down in this old press here. We also, after this festival, built another press of our own that was made in 1907 in the Columbus Iron Works, and we would squeeze that sorghum down and boil it down to make molasses, and that would be one of the things we do in the fall season. In the summer season, we would actually grow corn and other crops out there and have a Hardman Farm to table after hours dinner. So just trying to do a lot of things to put Hardman Farm on the map, and having a lot of educational festivals for kids, after hours, fundraisers for dinners. And you'll see the Nakuchi Mound over here, which is about 1,200 years old. It was excavated back in 1915 by Dr. Hayes of the Smithsonian Foundation. Dr. Hayes got about halfway through until he found a Spanish piece of 8 that Dr. Hardman wanted. And Dr. Hayes said that wasn't in agreement, and Dr. Hardman said, pack your bags. So Dr. Hayes went back to Washington, D.C. with the other half of the mound untouched. But at that time, they did pull about 742 artifacts out of the mound. Most of it was pottery, some of it was smoke pieces, and a couple of pieces of metal that they had traded, and some shell necklaces where they had traded with coastal tribes. I will say as a disclaimer, because I am a government employee, but if I give you a pot and it's one artifact and it gets dropped, it turns into 12 artifacts. So 700 and so forth artifacts is a little bit misleading, but it's very interesting things that were found in the mound. There were also 42 bodies discovered in the mound as well, and those were returned to the mound. The rest of the artifacts are in the basement of the Smithsonian to this day. One of the other neat things we did at Hardman Farm was Valley Voices. It was written by a local author who was on our Friends board there, and we actually turned that story of the 4 families that called Hardman Farm home into an outdoor drama. So we actually had live musket fire, live horses, and a 1932 Ford pull up in the middle of the show as the scenes would change. So just try to do a lot of outside the box stuff at Hardman Farm, programs and events, and just anything we could do to let people know that Hardman Farm is there and open to the public. Folks have driven by it for 100 years as it's been owned by one family, which is another interesting thing to hear about this island owned by one family, the Dominions, for 100 years as well. But now that it's open to the public, we really wanted to kind of pull out all the stops and get it open. So as I mentioned, I was fortunate enough to have a Friends chapter there at Hardman Farm. This is our board here, sitting on the porch of the old general store. This was one of the 3 structures of the 19 that was built by Dr. Hardman. Dr. Hardman took the 16 structures from Captain Nichols and left them as is and lived in the mansion there. But he also built a dairy barn, a creamery, and a general store. The general store was located right next to the Nakuchi Railroad that came right through the Chattahoochee Valley there in White County, and that's where he sold plows and other things as well. But our Friends group started with just a couple of people when I first came on board in 2015, 100 years later. And when I did, we were fortunate enough to start doing some things that got a lot of attention of a lot of the locals there that lived in the Nakuchi Valley and really wanted to get involved with what we were doing. So a lot of our after hours dinner events, they would come and set up a lot of the greenery for us and just really add that special touch to a lot of the events. And we do a Victorian Christmas at Hardman Farm, which is where on Friday and Saturday nights we have the entire house decorated in greenery. And in each of the 8 rooms of the mansions, we'll have anywhere from 1 to 4 or 5 characters in each room portraying a Christmas party of Captain Nichols from 1877. And if you walk in, they don't break character. They'll comment on the strange-looking timepiece on your wrist and things of that nature. But it feels like going right back into a Christmas party in the mountains in 1877. And we used 55 volunteers for that 3-week program to pull it off. We really couldn't have done it without them. So I've just been very fortunate to be a part of Friends groups at Hardman Farm. Smithgall Woods are the 2 I just came from, and the other parks previously. So really thankful to get to speak to y'all tonight and look forward to working with y'all this year. I know how much the staff works very hard and speaks so well of y'all here in the Historic Resources, but I also know that the Friends group really breathe a lot of spirit and character into the property. So really looking forward to the year. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and move into Jekyll Island, where I've been the last summer. So just coming up on 5 months of being here, and just learned where the bathroom's at is about all I've done so far. But just real excited to be here, and just seeing the excellence that's been going on the past few years with Jekyll Island and the renovations with the museum, and just real excited about jumping in on such a lot of great work that's already been happening and learning some of the history that goes on here at Jekyll. So what I thought I would do on the next couple of slides is tell y'all a little bit about some of the things that we've done, and kind of at the same time talk about some of the things that we're wanting to do. A little bit of the technology in the museum has started to wear out a little bit. And as you all may know, I may be preaching to the choir here, the trolleys are constantly in a rough environment. So when I got here, a lot of the PA systems were breaking down and would sometimes quit 2 or 3 times on a tour, just to being in sideways rain sometimes. So we've been fortunate to take a look at some of these things and invest back into them. So one thing that we've done here is install a PA system here in the museum. I did notice that a lot of the tour guides would have to run around and tell everybody it's time for a tour, and it seemed to kind of disrupt everything. And then a lot of times there'd be folks in the restrooms that we wouldn't catch. So we actually put a speaker system here in the museum that is in the restrooms. It's in this building, in this room here, as well as outside on the paddock and the trolley shed, where we can make announcements and let folks know that it's time for a tour, so we can get those started on time. I know a lot of time we have upped the tours. We do more than we ever have, so being able to start off on time and make sure the motor coaches start on time has been a little helpful too. And as I just mentioned, the trolley PAs, we've put all new PAs in the trolley systems, tried to find ways to make them a little louder, as well as being able to be a little more reliable. Since we put these trolley PAs in a couple of months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, we haven't had to do any restarts throughout the tour, which would really impact the guest experience if you've got to restart those trolleys. I know y'all seen them out there. They're real quiet when you crank them up. So we want to try to minimize doing that as much as possible. There's a couple of really neat interpretive displays that Andrea, who you all know, the curator, has put a lot of time into building, but some of the handsets where you pick up and listen to one of the speakers from history's past had quit working. 3 out of 4 had quit working. So we've replaced, we're in the process of, we've replaced one and it went real well. So we're in the process of replacing those 2. Getting some new whisper devices, which are the little hearing device pieces that you put in. If a trolley does go bad, we've got good backup systems now too. There's something out in the museum, in the gallery, called the Magic Mirror. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but you step in front of it and it puts you in a Gilded Age attire, and not very educational, neat, but not educational. It's just been real problematic. So I went to a conference last week. It's the National State Park Directors Conference, and met a vendor who had this display. And the example was Frederick Douglass, but you're able to walk up to a full-size screen with a historical character on the screen and push a button and ask that character any question that you want. It actually develops AI technology, and we provide all the information for them to pull from, as well as certain websites that we would approve for them to pull from. You want to make sure that you don't have websites you don't approve, because we don't want any children asking where babies come from. So it is selective on the material that we provide, but you ask the character any question, he'll cross his arms and think for a minute, and then give you a very interesting 60-second response to it. Another neat thing about it is we can leave it at the adult stage most of the time, but if we have a 3rd grade field trip, we can actually change it to a 3rd grade level, and it'll speak to children at that age that come in. So we're looking at upgrading that exhibit in the museum as well. I know you all saw the Civil Rights exhibit, which is brand new out here in the lobby. Andrea and her team, our collections team with Meg Tanner and Faith Plazerin have put a lot of work into that, getting it out on the floor, so we're real proud of it. We do believe it's going to run out there for about a year, and we may have another exhibit in about a year that's going to talk about the history of golf on Jekyll Island. Since there is some changes coming to the golf courses out here, we are going to make sure we capture some of the historic courses and put that exhibit together as well. So staff and resources, we've been able to work with the team here. There's a strange picture of a four-wheeler up there. I know everybody's wondering what that's at, but we're excited because we did just get that vehicle that we're going to start housing over at our offices at Villa Ospo and put it in Mr. Jennings' garage. Hopefully not follow his fate, but we will keep it in the garage there, and we're going to use that as we shuttle between cottages and run different displays and furniture and things. But we found ourselves just constantly using staff vehicles to run between the cottages and historic structures. So we're glad to have a small vehicle that we can use on the side roads, pedestrian roads here in Jekyll and run around. So that's kind of some resources that we've been able to get here recently. We were also putting together a leadership program here at the museum. So some of the management and the full-time guides, we're starting to meet monthly and make sure they've got what they need, trying to build the venue program out here. So there's a lot of weddings and rentals that are really taxing the staff. So we want to make sure we're working smarter there with the vendors and put them together. And you'll see here Dana and Patrick. Dana, our former assistant manager, now works in human resources, and Patrick, our educator, going on an outreach program to Coastal College. So they've started a new history club at Coastal College. So we're working with them to have their students volunteer on Wednesdays, and I'll talk a little bit more about volunteering in just a minute, but they'll volunteer here on Wednesdays. We're also talking to their club about possibly having a big annual event once a year that they volunteer at. We're looking at maybe having an annual event every March or April. It's kind of a living history program, and we'd like to have their college class be 4 or 5 characters and really dive into that living history program for us. But speaking of volunteers, we also just kicked off earlier this month our volunteer program here at the museum. So Jekyll Island does have a volunteer coordinator. We've worked with her to set up where Tuesdays and Thursdays volunteers can come out here to the museum and volunteer for about 4 hours a day. And what we started slow. We started with them working in just outside here in the lobby, and also in the museum gallery. So where a lot of our tour guides have been working in those spaces, but sometimes needing to go out on tours, and that's the first position we cut, where there might not be somebody working and greeting people as they come into the cottages. This is now going to give us just a little bit more resources and people to work with in that volunteer program. And we're looking to develop that program. We may move it into Faith Chapel. We may move it into Dominion Cottage if we start opening Dominion Cottage similarly to like we do Faith Chapel, where it'll be more open for folks that are just walking through the district to be able to pop in Dominion and not have to wait for that 1-hour tour to come around. So just really trying to be able to give ourselves the deeper bench and the flexibility to access more properties. So programs and events. This is, like I said, with Hardman Farm, just kind of a big thing for me. I think it's a lot of fun to bring history to life. That's kind of one of my favorite things to do, is look at old recipes, old drinks they may have come up with, and find a way to bring those to the people. And obviously we don't bring them inside the house museums, but on the lawn, and give an opportunity to open up a cottage and maybe see some things that you wouldn't normally see. Possibly, like I say, living history in some of the rooms and just bring it to life. I think it's fun to make history fun. It helps us approach a younger audience, as well as, I believe a smart person once said, you can teach somebody almost anything as long as you don't let them know that you're teaching them something. So if we can make it fun, I think that's something we'd like to do. So Patrick is our brand new programmer. He's fairly new to the spot, even though he was a part-time programmer before that. So we're just sort of trying to build upon our programs and events and make them dynamic, and they've done a great job with that already. A lot of this was already on the calendar. So a lot of this is just stuff that we're building on, but you all were mentioning mid-century modern before. That'll be your next program with Taylor. I know you'll really enjoy it. He had a sold out crowd when he put it on for the first time last year. So we're starting to put some mid-century awareness out there. With the program, we're also looking at doing the driving tour once again. And we are also contacting some folks in mid-century modern that if they'll let their houses be on the tour. Of course, you don't go into the home nor stop at the home, but it's mid-century modern, as you said before, Bruce, something that fortunately hasn't taken a hard beating out here on the island. It's been very well protected, and we think it's just a gem to really focus on out here at the island and continue protection. So Wander St. Andrews was one of the programs we just finished up, and that's where our team went out with conservation as well and went to the southern end of the island and did a wander program, partnered with a nature program as well. So coming up, I promise this display was not for my program, even though it might be a little scary, but our Gilded Age and Ghouls program is coming up for the third year. This year, we've really enhanced the decorations to the Mistletoe Cottage, which has become the haunted mansion of the season. So that's really neat. It actually kicks off this Friday night. We have our first program, so we've started a little earlier in September this year, but it's a neat program. It's a trolley ride with some experiences that some employees have had here on the island before, and it takes you to Mistletoe, where you'll get to meet a couple of characters in there that can tell you about some historic experiences that have happened out here on the island, but that's real neat. We're also looking this winter, after Holly Jolly, to do a walking tour that'll take you in several cottages in the cooler months. Of course, you all are familiar with Holly Jolly coming up. I've been coming to Jekyll for 25 years myself. I've never been to Holly Jolly, so we're looking forward to seeing it as well. We're also looking at a bike ride program this winter, where we may take a bike ride into a couple of cottages here in the district and then make it all the way down to the Horton House before coming back down here. So looking forward to that. Hollyborn Spotlight is a big deal. We have invested about $125,000 into Hollyborn right now. With just the interpretation aspect, I know there's been a lot of work done in the last decade with carpentry and some of the restoration on the interior. But there's been a new exhibit that has just been installed in Hollyborn in the lower levels there. So we're looking at another installation coming in February, and that will finish the first floor of Hollyborn. A lot of our tours right now go into houses that we say are staged, and you'll see interpretation in there, restored furniture and pieces in there. But Hollyborn has always been a work in progress, but it is now entering the staged portion of its life, to where there'll be some things to see in there as well. So we are hoping come March or April, we are going to have a big Hollyborn spotlight out there that we are considering parking down at Villa Ospo and coming into Villa Ospo for a reception and seeing some archives you wouldn't normally see and learning a little bit about the behind the scenes of Hollyborn before actually walking in and hearing a little bit more from the curator and the preservationist about what all is going into Hollyborn over the last couple of years and the last decade or so to lead up to getting that one back on the map. And my last slide for you is kind of some stuff that we are in the process of or just beginning. So you will see a Native American excavation that happened some time ago. I'm not really sure. Cannot recall the dates that occurred, but all of those Everything that was collected at that time has been in state collections up in Carrollton, Georgia. So we now have a team that is looking into those artifacts, determining how much interpretation is in what was collected and how that will affect Jekyll Island. Is that something that we could use to enhance the current Native American display in the museum, or does it merit an entire display on its own? So we do have a research team looking into those now. I've already mentioned the gentleman up here on the ladder installing our civil rights exhibit. You'll see the little diagram of the old windmill. And that's part of our Lost Buildings project. And I believe the Lost Buildings project has kind of ebbed and flowed and kind of come and gone at different stages and different calibers every time that we do something. But I know you'll see a lot of the brick outlines throughout the district that tell you about some lost buildings that are there. You'll also see some interpretive panels. You can read about lost buildings throughout the property. We are looking at some cast iron rails that have a see-through glass to where you can actually look through the glass and see the silhouette of the lost building that was there. We've got one out there right now of the Parker House, but it didn't turn out quite where we liked it, so we're going to do a little reset there. But lost buildings is something that we're constantly working on, I believe in perpetuity almost. As we're working on some other big projects that are taking most of our attention. Whenever we get a breathing moment, we come back to lost buildings and try to figure out where to incorporate more of that recognition throughout the historic district. You will see a new trail being cut. You may have already noticed it over here from Pier Road down to the old furnace cottage. That is going to be designated as the Lost Buildings Trail. And we do anticipate about 4 panels to go in that area. So Indian Mound right there in the middle did get a fresh coat of paint this summer. So a lot of the trim work got touched up and a lot of the paint got done, so that was a big project this summer as well. Down below, I've already mentioned the Hollyborn project. It looks absolutely nothing like that now. It's very neat to see some old furniture in there that showcases also some exhibits that showcase the tabby work and just other neat bridge building aspects of that cottage. Really neat to see. The little picture of us digging in the mud here is something fun that happened right after Tropical Storm Debbie, where some bones were exposed on the beach. Georgia State Patrol got the phone call and they had our conservation team go out there and make sure they weren't human remains or sea turtle remains. Once that was ruled out, our team got to go out and take a look and determine that it was bovine. It was some type of mammal species. We thought it might be a bison at the time. We were fortunate to have contacts with a paleontologist who came down and found out that it was a very small horse. So it is a mature horse. We do know that by looking at the teeth. We were able to collect pretty much the entire skeleton, and we do know it was one species that was located in those mud flats right there in Driftwood Beach. So we have collected that entire skeleton, what we could, and sent it off to have it radiocarbon dated. So we hope in the next few weeks or months we'll know exactly where that horse came from. Horses did become extinct on the North American continent around 13,000 years ago, so it could be one of those species. It could also very likely be a leftover species from Spanish exploration, where some of the horses just got wild and had a couple of generations of horse out here. But either way, it's kind of a fun little puzzle to play with while we're doing things. The last thing on this slide, on my last slide here, is the Gould Casino. Of course, it looks nothing like that right now, but we have our team in Historic Resources has pitched it to administration that we would like to rebuild the exterior of the cottage. We believe that rebuilding the exterior of the cottage will put further interest into helping something to be done with the interior. So we're very excited about this opportunity. And I was hoping to have a little bit more to report to y'all today. I do not, but I do know that administration is positive about taking a look at this. This is something they want to do. I believe they're looking for opportunities and funding to be able to do something with it. But we worked with our marketing team to do this mock-up and kind of what we think it might look at. I also wanted to itemize different structures on the structure that would allow us to let administration know these are the things we want to do. This is why we want to bring back these certain features of the cottage, of the structure, and still let it be functional. As it is today, we do use it with Jekyll Island Authority, so we wanted to make sure that it was still a usable structure, but also a very attractive structure. It is pretty much the last building in the historic district that hasn't gotten a little attention lately, so we'd like to see the facade of it redressed and have it fit the rest of the beautiful buildings that we're fortunate to have here in the district.
Hey, Will, you try to relook the Allman Brothers, come here and play games?
I would love to. I'd love to. That's another connection I have. Is my first state park I ever worked at was High Falls State Park, just outside of Macon. And I used to take people on historic tours down to the old powerhouse, which was the Talladega River Powerhouse. Georgia Power eventually bought it. And Talladega, everybody said, why don't you call it Talladega State Park? We said, well, Talladega translates to roasted scalp. So we didn't want to do that. But the Talladega High Falls State Park had the old powerhouse there, and the Allman Brothers would go and play in the old powerhouse. And if you look it up, you can find an Allman Brothers song called High Falls. And it's very good, and it's from when they used to play there. So I don't know we'll be bringing the Allman Brothers back, but Gould Casino, we'll try. So, I think that's everything on my list there, as we went already through with some pictures, and that's all I got. So, thank you.